Hi, Cubs. This is Mrs. Bailey. This week, we're going to look at different ways you can begin a story. We are going to be work on narrative beginnings. A narrative is just a story you're writing. It could be a story of something that you really did, like go to a birthday party, visit your grandma's house, have a movie day. Or it could also be a story that you're writing from your imagination. A narrative is just a story that you're writing. So let's get started. A lot of times, second graders start stories with one day I went to a teacher parade. Or they might just go very simple and say, I went to a teacher parade. Or first we got in the car. And those are great for kindergarten and first graders. But second graders, we need to add a little more detail to the beginning of our stories to really hook our reader. So this week, we're not going to start our stories with the words like one day, I went, or first we. I'm going to show you some better ways to start your beginnings. So let's learn from the experts. So as you can see here, there is a story called Fireflies. Now, Julie Brinklow, who is the author, she could have started her story by saying, I looked outside, because that was the first thing that happened in the book. But as you can see on the first page, she added more detail. Instead of just saying, I looked outside, Julie wrote, on a summer evening, I looked up from dinner through the open window to the backyard. Wow, wasn't that great detail? So you can see she added the season by using summer. She told us when it was during the day by using the word evening. We know that the child was sitting at the dinner table because she said, I looked up from dinner. And we know they're looking out the window to the backyard. So instead of just saying, I looked outside, Julie added all of those details to make that one sentence so much more detailed. Doesn't that sound great? Let's look at another example. Here's another story. It's called Do Like Kyla. It's written by Angela Johnson. So it's about two sisters, and she could have started her story by saying, we tapped at birds. But listen to how Angela Johnson really started her story. In the morning, my big sister Kyla stands at the window, tapping at the birds. I do like Kyla, only standing on my bed. Doesn't that beginning sound so much better? So Angela Johnson was able to tell us when it was during the day. She used the words in the morning. We know they're standing at a window. We know what they're doing, tapping at the birds. And we know that there's a little sister there standing on the bed, also tapping at the birds. So Angela Johnson described the setting and told us exactly what was happening. Instead of just saying, we tapped at birds, she added so much more detail. Here's another one of my favorite stories. It's Owl Moon by Jane Yolen. And you can see on the cover, Jane Yolen won an award for this story. She could have started and said, I went owling with my dad. That is what the whole story's about, and that's the first thing that happened. But instead, I want you to listen to the detail she used on her very first page in the beginning of her story. It was late one winter night, long past my bedtime, when Pa and I went owling. There was no wind. The trees stood still as giant statues, and the moon was so bright the sky seemed to shine. Somewhere behind us, a train whistle blew, long and low, like a sad, sad song. Wow! Didn't Jane Yolen do amazing with her beginning? She added so much detail about when it was happening. It was winter at night. We knew it was really late in the night. She talked about the weather. There was no wind. She talked about the setting. The trees were standing still and the moon was shining bright. She even told us some sounds when she described the train whistle blowing. That is an amazing beginning. Here's one more. The Kissing Hand by Audrey Penn. Audrey Penn could have started her story instead, Chester didn't want to go to school. But instead, she started with all of these details. Chester Raccoon stood at the edge of the forest and cried. I don't want to go to school, he told his mother. I want to stay home with you. I want to play with my friends and play with my toys and read my books and swing on my swing. Please, may I stay home with you? Now, didn't that beginning help you understand Chester so much more? So Audrey Penn used a character talking at the beginning of her story to really explain how he felt at the beginning. So what we were seeing is that some of these authors were describing the setting to make their story even better. So here are some examples if you want to use description of setting in your story. I could say, I went to the fair. Or I could describe the setting. There was color everywhere. Things were spinning and swirling in all directions. Children were laughing and mouths were crunching yummy food. I was so excited to be at the fair. Now, which beginning do you think sounds better? Definitely the description of the setting. Let's try another example. We were at the farm. Or I could describe the setting for my beginning. Fences, grass, and bales of hay surrounded us. Up the hill, I saw cows eating grass under the trees. Near the pond, I saw ducks swimming. We were at the farm. That definitely catches my attention a lot better when I describe the setting for my beginning. Let's try another example. One day we went camping. Or I could write, it was getting darker as we walked along the stream. The mountains were shining in the moonlight. We were almost at the campsite. Yep, that sounds a lot better instead of one day we went camping. So all of these are beginnings where I described the setting to start my story. Another thing authors can do is use sounds to start their stories, or a big fancy word for that is onomatopoeia. But it basically means it's a sound. So I could say, we played with water balloons. Or I could say, splat! The water balloon landed right on top of my foot. My sister and I were playing with water balloons. Do you see how I used a sound at my beginning? It makes it a little more fun, doesn't it? Let's try another example. I could say, I played cowboys. Or I could start with a sound. Bang, bang, bang! I was the cowboy and my brother was the robber. I ran after him on my horse, which was a long stick. So that beginning sounded much more interesting because I used a sound. Let's try one more example. First, I called my grandma. Or I could start with a sound. Ring, ring. I was waiting for my grandma to answer the phone. I was calling her to see if she would come over to my house for dinner. Sometimes starting with a sound word is a great way to start your beginning. Another way to start your beginning is if you start with a character talking, which is called dialogue. I could say, first I cleaned my room. Or I could start my story with someone talking. My mom shouted, "You have to clean your room before you play video games." I said, "Okay," and started cleaning my room quickly. You see how I used the words my mom was saying to help start my story? Here's another example. I played with my neighbor. Or I could start with dialogue. "Hi, Chloe. Do you want to come to my house and play today?" I asked my neighbor. She smiled and said, "Yes." Do you see how that beginning is a little more interesting because I used a character talking? Here's one more example. One day, I made a fort. Or I could start with a character talking. "I'm so bored," I whined to my mom. It was a rainy day and I had nothing to do. I couldn't go outside and play. My mom said I should make a fort. So you can see every time, instead of just doing a simple sentence, I could use a character talking to start my story. One other way that makes your beginnings even more interesting is by adding some action or exciting verbs to the beginning. So I could start my story and say, "We played tag." Or I could write some action words. "I zoomed quickly by the swing set and was catching up to Jenny. She sprinted faster ahead, but I ran even faster. We were playing tag." Do you see how those action words, the verbs, made that so much more interesting? Let's try another one. I played hide and seek. Or I could add some action words. I tiptoed behind the tree and stood as silent as a mouse. Sam was wandering around clumsily with the blindfold. I love playing hide and seek. That beginning of my story sounds so much more interesting now that I added some verbs. How about this one? I woke up. Or I could add some verbs. As the alarm went off, he opened his eyes slowly and sat up in bed. With a big yawn, he stretched out his arms to both sides. Do you see how those verbs, the action words, made that beginning so much more exciting? So now it's your turn. This week, you're going to try to write a beginning, and each day, you're going to write the beginning of a story. It could be the same story if you want, and just try 4 different beginnings, or you could try 4 different stories. It's your choice. But by the end of the week, pick one of your beginnings that you're going to read to your teacher on Google Meet. Here are my examples. I'm thinking about the teacher parade all the Clear Creek teachers did on Friday afternoon. I'm going to use the same story, but try to start it in different ways, just like you're going to do this week. On Tuesday, you're going to try to write a story using the description of the setting. Here's my example. I could say, "We did a teacher parade." Or I could say, "The sun was shining and the wind was blowing gently. There was a long line of cars full of decorations and sweet signs to students. We were getting ready to start the teacher parade." So as you can see, instead of just writing one simple sentence for my beginning, I described the setting first. On Wednesday, you're going to try to start your story with a sound word. Here's my example. I could say, "We did a teacher parade." Or I could write, "Honk, honk, honk. Mrs. Wilson honked her car horn and we knew it was time to start the teacher parade." Isn't that nice how just a couple sound words makes the beginning so much more interesting? On Thursday, you're going to write the beginning of your story and try to use a character talking to begin with. Here's my example. I could say, we did a teacher parade. Or I could put some characters talking first. I cannot wait to see my students, said Mrs. Hoyle. Your car looks beautiful with all those decorations, exclaimed Mrs. Corpening. We were all ready for the teacher parade. So this example, I had two characters talking. And on Friday, you're going to try to write the beginning of a story by using verbs, action words. Here's my example. I could say, we did a teacher parade, or I could add some action to it. We jumped in the car and slammed the door shut. We quickly buckled our seatbelts and held our signs up. With smiles on our faces, we were finally ready for the teacher parade. So, good luck this week writing your beginnings. Remember, each day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you're going to write a different beginning of a story. You could use the same story like I did for my examples, or you could do a different story, but you only have to write the beginning to practice that. By the end of the week, read one of your examples to your teacher on Google Meet. Good luck, Cubs!